Hello, my name is Dean Contover, and this is The Current Buzz. Today we have Charlie Gargiulo. He is an author. He wrote a book about Little Canada. It's called Legends of Little Canada, and I'm going to show you the book so you can pick it up. And we're going to talk about Little Canada, where it is, and actually it's in Lowell, Massachusetts. And is it still existent? Does it still exist to a certain degree?
No, it was torn down.
It was torn down.
It was in the Acre neighborhood.
Yeah, it was in the Acre, not the naked neighborhood, the Acre neighborhood.
Acre neighborhood.
Yeah.
Did I say that?
So, I mean, I'm going to show you the book. Here it is. Yeah, and Charlie talks about it. It says, on the cusp of becoming a teenager, Charlie lived through the planned destruction of the Little Canada neighborhood in Lowell, Massachusetts, 1960. This is a story that he went on to become a legendary community organizer, which is true, who led efforts to ensure people would have a decent housing, fair chance to earn a living, and a happy life for themselves, which is, I like that. That's on the back of the book. So what made you write this book? I mean, I've known you a long time.
Yeah.
We've known each other a long time. And then when I heard you wrote the book, I said, cool. And then I picked it up and I read it and I said, we have to get this guy in here.
Well, thanks for having me, Dean.
No problem. No problem, Charlie.
Yeah, no. Little Canada was a section of Lowell. It's in the Acre now. It would have been in the Acre. It's near Moody Street was the main street of it. So people who know Moody Street would understand that was like the center of Little Canada. But
that's where all the action was.
Yeah. So if you take Merrimack Street and you go down to from City Hall on Merrimack Street, for people who know Lowell, and all the way down to the river, that was pretty much Little Canada. And the French Canadians came in the 1880s and they settled there. They came originally, basically, they were brought in as strike breakers, pretty much, for the Irish at the time. But the French Canadians didn't know that that's where they were coming. They were coming down to work the mills because, they
had a hard life.
Things
in
were
Canada.
tough up in Quebec, yeah. So they when they came in the 1880s, they ended up like settling in that area, and over time, because it was near the mill buildings, and over the years, they developed a pretty, amazing community that lasted until the 1960s. They had a French-speaking newspaper, L'Etoile, and it was a really tight-knit community.
A French-speaking church?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Saint Jean Baptiste, they called it. I always call it Saint Jean the Baptist.
Okay.
But because I talk in the book, it's funny. I mean, I actually grew up in Drake-it. And I didn't move to Little Canada until I was 11 years old, and that's where that's where the book starts, and that was like in 1963.
Okay.
And I came at the time, little did I know when I was moving in there that I was going to be there for the final years of Little Canada, because in the next couple of years it was completely destroyed by, it was called Urban Renewal Project.
Yeah, Urban Renewal. I mean, a lot of inner cities throughout the country were going through urban renewal. That was the term, urban renewal.
Yeah.
And what happened to you?
Yeah, well, that's great language, right? It sounds like it was a wonderful thing. Like, well, we're going to renew the city for these people. But that's why I kind of wrote the book. It was because my experience was that, one, I had a beautiful community, and two, as a child, I wanted to write, and I did write it in my voice at the time. So it reads like, 11, 13-year-old boy trying to describe, what's going on. You come in, my aunt lived there. I developed a whole bunch of friendships. My mom had grown up there, and she, I was there with her now. And a whole bunch of people, that's why I call it Legends of Little Canada. People like ran Hobby's bookstore, this homeless guy, Captain Jack, that befriended me. All these wonderful characters. It's almost like a novel. It reads like a novel, and I tried to make it read like a novel. I wanted to do it literature. I
did a good job.
Thank you. Yeah. I didn't want to do like a polemic, to come in and give my hand away and say basically, the urban renewal was a bad thing. You know, they destroyed my community. It destroyed the lives of a whole bunch of people that lived there. I won't do spoiler alerts, but you know, there were people that literally, like, I know, you know, elderly people who literally died when they were forced out of there after having lived there all their lives. So, and when I try to write it as a kid, you know, through the eyes, trying to understand, like, wow, what? How is this happening? You mean they're going to come and literally throw us out of our homes and tear our home and all my neighbors and the whole neighborhood is going to be destroyed? And I remember as a kid, you can imagine, you know, I'm thinking like, they can't do that. You know, this is America, right? It's not Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
You can't just come in and like throw people out of their homes. Well, you know, that's what ended up happening. And I think one of the reasons you asked why I wrote the book, it was because all my life, it always bothered me. I always wanted to know who did this. Why were they allowed to get away with this? Why didn't anybody stop it? And so I think that's what kind of drove my life to try to find those answers. And you know, and that's a whole other story later on. I ultimately did, and then I saw similar situations where this was happening and tried to stop it. But I wanted to reclaim the narrative for the people who lived there, like my family and the other people, because one of the things is I grew up, and if you did go around Lowell and you wanted to ask people, hey, did you ever hear about Little Canada and Lowell or whatever, you usually get a response from people that, you'll get two. One, people who live there, whatever, they'll say how wonderful it was and, you know, and what an amazing community it was. But two, they'll talk about urban renewal and they'll talk about it like it's a, you know, well, maybe it was bad that it would happen to people, but it was ultimately a good thing because those buildings were dumps. You know, or they'd hear about Little Canada. Moody Street was full of bar rooms, and it was a dive in a red light district, and you know, and it's true. The buildings were horrible. I grew up in one of them. We didn't have like a shower or a bathtub in the building, but you know,
wow.
Yeah. But what I always contended was that if you were really doing it for the people who lived there, you know, then you would have involved them in the planning process. Well, how can we?
I don't think they thought about that.
No, they didn't. Of course, yeah.
No, they don't care. They didn't care. I mean, French Canadians were marginal people, and that's how they felt about them. And let's get rid of them and make them move to someplace else.
Yeah, and that's the story, you know, and they almost kind of dehumanized us, you know, and what I tried to do is like bring the humanity back so that people could understand the cost, the human cost, not by, like I said, writing a polemic and saying, oh, you know, this is how it should have been done. Like my 72-year-old voice, I would tell it differently. And usually people are going to turn it on or turn it off by, you know, oh, this is political, this is whatever. But I was saying, no, I want to try and remember what it felt like when I was actually going through it at 11, 13 years old. And of course, at 11, 13 years old, I don't have any formed politics. I don't know. It's more like,
that's right.
all I'm talking about, this is what's happening, and this is what I see, and why isn't anybody helping my Aunt Rose? Why isn't anybody helping anybody? And just that sense of powerlessness, and I was hoping that maybe make people feel, you know, what the experience was like, rather than try and tell people. And like my partner even told me, like after she read the book, that what I thought was one of the nicest compliments about the book was, for years, people who did know me in Lowell when I was doing community activist work or whatever, I'd refer to my Aunt Rose and other people and say, we can't let that happen again, what like happened to my Aunt Rose.
She's prominent in the book, Aunt Rose. I did read your book last year. And after reading it, I was thinking, if there's any courses in college in city planning, this should be a signed book for people to have, or high school, to get an understanding of why these things happen and what we could do about it, rather than, you know, and listen to the people.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, you know, that was the whole thing. So I wanted to, never mind the part, I wanted to just get the, you know, our decent angels, you know, inside ourselves, like another human being. If you know, if you knew my experience, you'd care about it. If you knew me, or I know your experience, I'd care about it. But if you see a kid, and if you can understand what this kid is feeling, you would like to hope that somebody would respond to that. And that's what I tried to do, to kind of break it down. And your idea about the schools, I think, is a very important one. Ironically, I am going to be speaking to Lowell High School students tomorrow through the Department of Social Studies.
Cool.
Is bringing me in. And it's good because we want people to learn about the history of Little Canada and what happened, and also be able to link it with other immigrant experiences, because it's the issue of forced displacement.
That's a good point in regards to immigrants that are coming from different countries. They were displaced probably in their countries.
Yeah, in far more extreme circumstances.
Yeah, exactly.
Than me.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah, but the point is that I wanted to show that we can relate to each other as human beings, because, my experience, I might be more sensitive to understanding, like, oh, when somebody tries to tell me what it felt like to be forced away from their home, from their families, and other kinds of things, they might be surprised to understand, well, maybe I might understand it a little bit, because it did happen to me, not with the same extreme measures. I wasn't violently forced out, but people died, as a result, especially elderly people, from this experience. I mean, it was very traumatic.
Right.
And I wanted to try and bring that connection, that human connection that we all have. And as you mentioned with school, one of the things that bothered me is that the graduate programs, like the teach urban studies or public policy for people who are going to go into government, a lot of it, they gotten away from that human piece of it. It's all about statistics or, like this study and that study. And it's like, you got to get literature into it. You still have to have these people learn to feel, because they're going to be the ones going out there impacting the lives of other people. So maybe if they could, they didn't have to know my experience, but if they read about it, or like Michael Patrick McDonald, who wrote about South Boston, maybe you get through, especially through the eyes of a child, maybe, you might understand what it feels like. So when you're doing these policies, you're going to take into account the people that you're going to be impacting, who, have no power over what ultimate decision you're going to make, but maybe you have a responsibility, therefore, if you're going to learn and go out there and impact people's lives, to maybe try and understand how it feels.
Yeah, Charlie, when I read your book, I thought of Jack Kerouac, because his writing was bottom up, not top down. And I think your writing is also the same. It's bottom up and not top down. And I think that a lot of professors and a lot of people in education should read this book and have assign this book to their classes, so they can get an understanding of Lowell and small cities in America, which make up a lot of America. Mm-hmm. So I just want to let you know that's my feeling.
That means a lot to me, Dina.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we've known each other a long time. I remember the days when you were in the military at Fort Devens and everything, and you're a veteran, and you came home, and you got involved in politics, and you started a thing called the Coalition for a Better Acre. Was that your thing?
Yeah, no, I mean,
military?
I'm not trying to say, I find it, but I did find it. Basically the reason why I found it was because I was involved with a group called Fair Share at the time.
Okay.
And I discovered that the city was coming to destroy a whole other neighborhood, the Acre Triangle, which is ironically right across the canal from where I lived. I was living in public housing.
Explain the Acre Triangle, so in case people who lived in Lowell or didn't live in downtown or didn't associate with downtown, and
it was a part of the Acre that was the closest to downtown. It was like sort of, if people know the streets, it's like it was called the Triangle because it was like Fletcher Street, Broadway Street, and Suffolk Street formed the kind of triangle, and in between it was Adams Street and LaGrange Street at the time. Yeah. And it was kind of the inner city of the Acre, and and right across the canal was the public housing where I grew up. And when I came out of the Army, my neighborhood had changed. All my friends were there, and it was mainly a Puerto Rican neighborhood at the time. But I just happened to live in it, and now this were all my friends. It didn't mean anything. I was out playing basketball, and all of a sudden now I'm finding my friends and neighbors. Now they're being targeted for a displacement plan, because now this was the 80s, and Lowell was hot, downtown, the Urban National Park and everything.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And so now economically, let's take this land and throw these people out. And it was like Little Canada all over again. And when I founded the Coalition for a Better Acre, the reason why it was called the Coalition was because I realized that these were forces that were much too powerful for me with my organization Fair Share to deal with alone. So we had I came up with this idea of like, well, and get the church involved, St. John the Baptist, with Father Oben, who was a great man at the time, and other different organizations like we got the Episcopal Church, and then we got the Puerto Rican Festival Committee, Unitas, and a bunch of other people. Asked them to join me so that we could buy some time. Because the city couldn't just destroy me and my little organization, and all of a sudden they had to pause and say, "Wait a minute, what is this coalition of groups?" Because they were just trying to radicalize me and all this other kind of stuff. And this way, all of a sudden I have Father Oben and the people from the YWCA and other people to kind of say, "Well, wait a minute, maybe they got a little bit more going on here than we thought." And I did that to buy us some time because we needed to organize people in the community to let them know this was
Were
happening.
you the founder of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm the one who brought the people together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and decided, in fact, when I first came up with a name, for the Lowell Sun, it was kind of like, it wasn't meant to be an organization. It was kind of, it was the Coalition to Improve the Acre. And then I realized the initials were the CIA. So then we had to change it to, Coalition for Better Acre. So now the CBA sounds a little better than the CIA,
And it's still going on today.
Yeah, it's many years later. I mean, I don't have anything to do with that.
Right. But let me tell you, I have to give you a lot of credit. I mean, to organize something like that and to move on City Hall and sort of back them up. And they listened. Believe me, they listened. And you did a good job. I have to give you a lot of credit.
Thank you.
A lot of people. You did more on your little pinky than most people did in their life.
Well, I don't know about that. It wasn't like I did it. I'm saying I founded it, but obviously what we did was organize the community.
Right.
And the people fought themselves
Right.
for their own homes.
Right.
I didn't just fight for them. I fought with them.
Right. No, I remember. I thought it was a good thing that you did.
And what my partner was saying to begin with was that idea is that so for years after I would tell a story about Aunt Rose, and people would say, "Oh, I feel bad for Charlie because what happened to his Aunt Rose and the people that he loved." And my partner, when she read the book, she said, now maybe when people read the book, instead of I feel bad for Charlie because he's lost his Aunt Rose, hopefully I wrote it in a way where people read it and they say, I feel like I lost my Aunt Rose.
Yeah, no, it was moving. I have to admit it. Even though I read it last year, I mean, it was moving. I mean, Aunt Rose is the person that everyone should read this book and relate to, Captain Jack, explain Captain Jack in your life. I mean, there's a song about Captain Jack, and I don't think you knew about it. I think Billy Joel's sang.
I think you were telling me
Captain,
about that.
Yeah, I did tell you about that. And you could Google it. Probably you could listen to the song.
I wish I could say it was for that reason.
Yeah, but that was pre. That was pre the song. I think if you're talking about '63, that song probably came out.
Yeah, well before that.
66, 67, something like that.
Yeah, no, Captain Jack, the irony is that I change everybody's name in the book except for my family.
Okay.
Even because it is a memoir, but I read it, reads like a novel, but just to protect people, I don't get anybody's right to use their name. So the only exceptions I made to that rule was outside of my family, was Harvey everybody knew Harvey's bookstore.
Yeah,
so
right.
and I wanted people to remember him. And then there was one nun, Noelle Charbonnel, who was really key and wonderful to me, and I wanted her to be remembered by her real name. I didn't feel like I was violating her privacy because it was kind of honoring her.
Right.
And Captain Jack, even though I never knew his real name, but we called him Captain Jack, and it was because of Jack Daniel's whiskey. He called himself Captain Jack.
I see.
And he used to take his bottle of Mr. Daniels.
And I think that's what it's about in the song.
Is it?
Yeah. Something to that effect.
Yeah.
It could be drugs. It could be alcohol. I don't remember the specifics.
And the funny thing about it was, when I did Captain Jack, I'm saying, oh my God, I'm writing a book, and everybody's going to say, another Captain Jack? You just had the Pirates of the Caribbean. It was Captain Jack, and I guess some old story, Treasure Hunt or whatever.
It's understandable.
treasure. Yeah, I don't remember the name of it now, but one of the old literature pieces. So can't you come up with a more original name? But the idea was no, I wanted that was what we called him. So I wanted his name in there. But he was a wonderful guy, and I think I told you the other day, that like people would put down people, because they were drinking, or he was a homeless guy and he lived in his apartment. He was probably a World War II vet. Or a Korean War vet, because you think if I was a kid in the '60s, that's like 20 years removed. So he was probably in his 40s.
Korean War.
So like my dad was Korean War, my uncles were in World War II. He was about that age.
Do you think that's what caused the problem in regards to the split up between your mother and father, PTSD or something?
I have no idea. What happened. Why that happened with my dad or whatever. But he didn't exhibit too many of the signs of PTSD with me. But it was but certainly a number of other people, I think a lot of that's why there were a lot of people who were drinking and other things at that point. And so, like now we talk about PTSD. Back then, that wasn't even a term.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
These poor people basically just had
suppressed.
Imagine what the experiences they must have gone through.
Yeah.
Like my Uncle Leo went through D-Day. He got a Silver Star through there. He went all the way to, into Germany. Yeah,
we'll talk about that after the show. I want to talk, I have 4 minutes. They're telling me I have 4 minutes left. The bully situation, I found that very interesting when the bully in the neighborhood approached you and how you handled it.
Well, I don't,
Well, it's Lowell, you know what I'm saying? So,
well, that's what I was scared moving in. I was thinking, how am I going to deal with this? And there was this kind of predatory kid.
Yeah, it always is.
Yeah, and and ultimately, I was scared to death. I thought I was going to be destroyed. I didn't have an old man. I didn't have an older brother. What was going to happen to me? And so I was afraid of losing my mom after I lost my dad, so I got into this mentality of like, I'm going to have to deal with this kid at some point. And so I kept preparing myself for it, and I kept thinking, like almost self-hypnotizing. People say imagining now, like athletes and stuff, imaging or whatever. Before my time, I just kept thinking, like, I got to get myself into thinking that if this kid beats me, then it's like he's going to take my mother away. And so that's what allowed me to kind of fight with the ferocity I had to. And luckily, fortunately, maybe because I had a good job, because he certainly pounded my head in pretty good, but I ended up outlasting him, and with a broken nose and everything else.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
No kidding.
But we ended up, but fortunately for me, I always wondered how my life would have ended up differently if I wasn't fortunate enough to get through that experience and come out on top.
We all have that experiences, and we all come through it.
Yeah.
And if you have a child that's being bullied, it makes a person better once you go through it, I think.
And
and meet it.
It started when I came in and I saw him beat a kid up. That's the other thing I should mention. I saw him from my window beat this skinny kid up downstairs, and he had him on the ground and he was kicking him in the face and everything else, and then he spit on him. And that stuck with me.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, like, I can't,
allow that.
It was more that image. It was that fear of that, and I think that's what drove me. If I hadn't seen that, I probably wouldn't have been able to have had any chance against him, but I didn't. I remember thinking he's going to have to knock me out rather than spit on me.
I mean, that's really part of the book too. I thought that you're talking about it. We're talking about Legends of Little Canada with Charlie Gargiulo. He wrote a book about living in Lowell when he was a young boy, and I feel it's a book it's bottom up rather than top down. And everyone should have a chance to read it because it's really, really a good book, I thought. And it talked about life in the city. And what I liked about it is Ring Olivio. We played that game too when I was a kid, and I could relate to that in regards to fighting off the hordes that would come to try to free the base.
Yeah.
And so forth. So it was really good.
Good stories.
Yeah, it was a good story. Do you know there's a book called Ring Olivio?
No.
And I looked for it at the house and I can't find it. But there's a book called,
Really?
Came out in the 70s.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it talks about the game that we played, as a young boy. And I'm sure a lot of people can't relate to it, but that's their loss.
Yeah.
You know, it was a great game. I loved
yeah.
it.
And I'm hoping kids will enjoy it. I mean, I wrote it for young adults.
Yeah.
So it's the kind of book that